Captain Marcus Chen had seen many strange things during his 15 years exploring the galaxy, but nothing quite like the scene unfolding before him on the observation deck of Nexus Station. The massive orbital platform served as a neutral meeting ground for dozens of alien species, and today it buzzed with unusual tension. At the center of the commotion stood a figure that immediately caught his attention. She was tall and graceful, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the station's artificial lights. Her features were delicate yet regal, with high cheekbones and flowing silver hair that cascaded down her back like liquid mercury. What struck Marcus most, however, were her eyes, or rather the absence of sight within them. They were a cloudy white, moving slightly as she turned her head toward different sounds. The alien crowds around her kept their distance, some pointing and whispering in languages Marcus recognized from his diplomatic training. The universal translator in his ear picked up fragments, cursed, broken, unworthy. The hostility was palpable, even from species known for their peaceful nature. Marcus watched as a group of Calarian merchants approached her, their insect-like features twisted in what he knew was disgust. The lead merchant chittered something harsh, and the translator rendered it as, "Your presence pollutes this sacred space. Defective one. Return to whatever hole spawned you." The princess, for Marcus could tell by her bearing and the remnants of fine clothing that she was nobility, straightened her shoulders but said nothing. Her silence only seemed to encourage the Calarians, who began to circle her like predators. "The great Zephyrian Empire sends us their refuse now," another merchant clicked. "No wonder your people fall to ruin. When the gods mark someone as broken, they should have the dignity to remove themselves from sight." Marcus felt his jaw clench. He'd studied the Zephyrian culture extensively during his academy days. They were an ancient civilization, known for their advanced technology and rigid social hierarchies. What he hadn't known was how they treated those with disabilities. Apparently, in their society, any physical imperfection was seen as a divine curse, making the afflicted person an outcast. The crowd grew larger and more hostile. Even species that typically minded their own business were joining in the verbal assault. A Thorian ambassador whose people prided themselves on logic and reason spoke up. "The Federation should not permit such specimens to attend diplomatic functions. It reflects poorly on all of us." Marcus had heard enough. He pushed through the crowd, his human height allowing him to see over most of the gathered aliens. As he approached, he noticed how the princess's hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, he realized, but from barely contained anger. She was holding herself back with impressive self-control. "Excuse me," Marcus said loudly, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. The translator broadcast his words in multiple languages. "I believe there's been some confusion here." The Calarian merchant turned toward him, compound eyes glittering with annoyance. "Human, this does not concern your primitive species. Move along." Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Actually, I think it does concern me. You see, I'm Captain Marcus Chen of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, and I'm here to escort Her Royal Highness to the Federation Council meeting." The lie came easily, and Marcus could see confusion ripple through the crowd. The princess turned toward his voice, her head tilting slightly as if trying to place him. He caught the faintest hint of hope in her expression before she schooled her features back to neutrality. "Impossible," the Thorian ambassador interjected. "The Zephyrian delegation sent no advance notice of human involvement." "That's because this is a special arrangement," Marcus continued smoothly, stepping closer to the princess. "The Terran Federation has been asked to provide additional security and diplomatic support for Her Highness's mission here. I'm sure you all understand the delicate nature of her visit." He offered his arm to the princess, speaking directly to her for the first time. "Your Highness, shall we proceed to the council chambers? I believe we're expected shortly." For a moment she hesitated. Marcus could almost see her weighing her options. Accept help from a complete stranger or continue to endure the humiliation alone. Finally, she placed her hand on his arm with practiced grace. "Of course, Captain Chen," she said, her voice melodious despite the strain Marcus could detect. "I appreciate the Federation consideration." As they walked away from the crowd, Marcus could feel dozens of eyes following them. The whispers continued, but they were different now, confused, uncertain. No one was quite sure what to make of this development. "You didn't have to do that," the princess said quietly as they moved toward the lift. Her accent was musical, with elongated vowels that made even basic words sound elegant. "Actually, I did," Marcus replied. "Where I come from, we don't tolerate bullies." She was quiet for a moment as they entered the lift. Marcus selected a random floor, buying them time to talk. "You're not really here to escort me, are you?" she asked. "No," Marcus admitted. "I'm here for the annual trade negotiations. But the escort part doesn't have to be a lie if you don't want it to be. Why would you help me? You don't even know who I am." Marcus studied her profile as the lift hummed upward. "I know you're someone who deserves better than what just happened back there. And I know that on my world we judge people by their actions, not by whether they fit someone else's idea of perfection." The princess was quiet for so long that Marcus wondered if he'd overstepped. Finally she spoke. "I am Princess Lyrelai of the Zephyrian Empire. I was sent here to negotiate a mining rights agreement with the Federation, but as you saw..." She gestured vaguely toward her eyes. "My people expected me to fail. They're hoping I will, actually. Why would they want their own negotiator to fail?" Her laugh was bitter. "Because if I fail, it proves that the gods were right to mark me as defective. If I succeed," she shrugged, "well, they'll find another explanation." The lift stopped and they stepped out onto an observation deck overlooking the planet below. Marcus led her to a bench where they could sit and talk privately. "What happened?" he asked gently. "If you don't mind me asking." "I was born this way," Lyrelai said simply. "In Zephyrian culture, any physical imperfection is seen as divine punishment for some sin. Since I've never committed any great crimes, the assumption is that I carry the sins of my ancestors. It makes me untouchable." Marcus felt anger building in his chest again. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, is it?" she challenged. "Your species hasn't exactly welcomed aliens with open arms. Why should I expect different treatment from you?" It was a fair point, and Marcus considered it carefully. "You're right. Humans have our own prejudices and blind spots. But we also have something else. We tend to root for the underdog. And right now that's you." 3 days after their first meeting, Marcus found himself genuinely impressed by Princess Lyrelai's capabilities. She had agreed to let him assist with her negotiations, and what he discovered challenged every assumption he'd made about disability and competence. The Federation Council chambers were a marvel of engineering, designed to accommodate the various environmental needs of dozens of species. The aquatic delegation sat in water-filled tanks, while the silicon-based crustaceans occupied specially heated platforms. Atmospheric controls created perfect microenvironments for each representative. Lyrelai navigated this complex space with remarkable skill. She had spent hours memorizing the chamber layout, and Marcus watched in fascination as she identified different species by their unique sounds. The Calarians' chittering, the Thorians' harmonic tones, the mechanical whirs of the synthetic coalition. The mining rights proposal centers on the Kepler 442 system, Federation Administrator Walsh explained, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. "The Zephyrian Empire claims historical precedence, but 3 other civilizations have filed competing claims." Marcus sat beside Lyrelai at the curved table, officially listed as her cultural advisor. The other delegations had accepted this arrangement, though he caught several suspicious glances directed their way. "Administrator Walsh," Lyrelai began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "I believe there's been some confusion about our historical claims. May I present evidence?" She reached into her diplomatic case and withdrew a crystal data storage device. Marcus had seen her prepare this presentation, working for hours to organize centuries of historical data into a compelling argument. What amazed him was how she accomplished this using adaptive technology, holographic displays that responded to voice, commands and tactile interfaces that converted visual data into formats she could process. The Zephyrian Empire first established mining operations in the Kepler 442, System 847 standard years ago, she continued, as the crystal projected a 3-dimensional star map above the table. These operations were documented in our central archives and reported to the Galactic Commerce Authority. The Calarian delegate clicked aggressively. "Historical claims mean nothing if they cannot be verified independently." "I anticipated that concern," Lyrelai replied smoothly. "I've brought original mining records from 3 independent sources: the Merchant Guild, the Stellar Navigation Authority, and the Environmental Monitoring Collective. All confirm Zephyrian presence and active operations during the time period in question. Marcus watched the other delegates exchange glances. The Thorian representative leaned forward. These records would need to be authenticated. Given the circumstances of their presentation, we must ensure their accuracy. The implication was clear. They were questioning whether a blind person could properly verify historical documents. Marcus felt his temper rise, but Lyrelai's calm response impressed him. "Of course," she said. "I've arranged for full authentication through the Federation's own archive system. The verification codes are embedded in each document. Would you like me to demonstrate the authentication process?" For the next hour, Lyrelai methodically walked through her evidence. She explained complex mining surveys, cross-referenced historical treaties, and cited precedent cases from Federation law. Marcus realized he was witnessing something remarkable. Not just competence despite her blindness, but competence that had been enhanced by it. "Your memory for detail is extensive," Administrator Walsh observed. "When you can't rely on visual references, you develop other methods," Lyrelai explained. "I've memorized thousands of legal precedents, historical records, and treaty provisions. It's more efficient than constantly searching databases." The Synthetic Coalition representative, a mechanical being called Unit 7743, spoke in binary tones that the translator rendered as, "This delegate demonstrates superior information processing capabilities. Her arguments are logically sound and well documented." Marcus noticed several delegates shifting uncomfortably. They had expected to dismiss the Zephyrian claims easily, assuming their representative would be incompetent. Instead, they faced one of the most prepared negotiators Marcus had ever seen. During a recess, Marcus and Lyrelai retreated to a quiet corner of the station's diplomatic quarter. "You're incredible in there," he told her. "I've never seen someone dismantle opposing arguments so systematically." "Thank you," she replied, though she sounded tired. "But I can feel their resentment building. They don't like being outmaneuvered by someone they consider defective. Let them be resentful. You're proving that their prejudices are wrong." Lyrelai was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What's it like?" "What's what like?" "Seeing. I've never experienced visual input. Sometimes I wonder what I'm missing." Marcus considered the question carefully. "It's immediate, I suppose. You get information about your environment instantly, colors, movements, expressions. But it can also be overwhelming. Sometimes I think you process information more efficiently because you're not distracted by visual clutter. My people believe the gods took my sight as punishment," she said softly. "But sometimes I wonder if they gave me something else instead." Before Marcus could respond, his communication device chimed. He checked the message and frowned. "We have a problem. The Calarian delegation has filed a formal complaint claiming your evidence is fraudulent." Lyrelai's expression hardened. "On what grounds?" "They're arguing that someone with your condition couldn't possibly have compiled such detailed records without assistance. They're demanding an investigation into whether you had help preparing your presentation." "That's absurd. Everything I presented came from official archives." "I know that and you know that, but they're playing to the gallery. Some of the other delegates are questioning whether you're actually capable of independent negotiation." Marcus watched anger flash across Lyrelai's features. "They can't accept that I might be better at this than they are, so they invent conspiracies. What do you want to do?" She stood up, her posture radiating determination. "I want to give them a demonstration they'll never forget. Tomorrow I'm going to negotiate without any technological assistance. No data crystals, no holographic displays, no adaptive interfaces. Just me, my memory, and my knowledge of Federation law." "Are you sure? That's putting yourself at a serious disadvantage, and is it?" she asked with a slight smile. "Marcus, they think my blindness makes me weak. Tomorrow I'm going to show them that it makes me formidable." That evening, Marcus helped Lyrelai prepare for what would essentially be a high-stakes academic competition. She spent hours reviewing her mental notes, organizing thousands of facts and legal precedents in her mind. Marcus tested her knowledge, throwing random questions about mining law, historical treaties, and Federation regulations. "Article 247 of the Galactic Commerce Code?" he asked. "Subsection A establishes guidelines for disputed territorial claims based on historical precedents," she replied without hesitation. "Subsection B requires verification through at least 3 independent sources, which I've provided. Subsection C allows for challenge periods of no more than 30 standard days after initial filing." The Treaty of Andromeda, signed 1247 years ago, established basic rights for exploration and resource extraction. Key provision is Article 12, which states that active, documented use of a system creates presumptive rights that can only be challenged by superior historical claims or evidence of abandonment. Marcus shook his head in amazement. You really have memorized the entire legal database. Not the entire database, she corrected with a smile. Just the parts relevant to mining rights, territorial disputes, and interspecies commerce law. About 14,000 individual statutes and precedents. 14,000, give or take a few hundred. I may have missed some of the more obscure regulations regarding methane-based life forms. As they worked late into the station's artificial night cycle, Marcus began to understand something profound. Lirelei hadn't succeeded despite her blindness. She had succeeded because of how she had adapted to it. Her memory, her analytical skills, her ability to process complex information without visual distractions had made her into something her sighted competitors couldn't match. Tomorrow, she would prove that to the entire galaxy. The Federation Council chamber buzzed with anticipation as delegates filed in for what everyone knew would be a decisive session. Word had spread throughout Nexus Station about the unusual challenge the Zephyrian princess had issued to defend her people's mining claims using nothing but her own knowledge and memory. Marcus took his seat beside Lirelei, noting the tension in her shoulders. She had spent the morning in meditation, a Zephyrian practice that helped organize her thoughts. Now she sat perfectly still, her white eyes focused on nothing, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The Calarian delegation has the floor, Administrator Walsh announced. The lead Calarian merchant, identified as Trade Prime Zixcar, rose from his curved platform. His insectoid features gleamed under the chamber lights as he addressed the assembly. Honored delegates, we are here to witness an obvious deception. No individual, regardless of species, could memorize the vast amount of legal precedent required for these negotiations without technological assistance. He gestured toward Lirelei with one of his forearms. This person claims to have comprehensive knowledge of mining law, territorial rights, and historical precedents spanning over a millennium. We contend that this is impossible for any organic mind, let alone one that is clearly defective. Murmurs of agreement rippled through several delegations. The Thorian representative nodded approvingly, while the aquatic delegation remained conspicuously silent. Furthermore, Zixcar continued, we suspect that the human advisor has been providing covert assistance through hidden technological means. We demand a full investigation and the immediate disqualification of the Zephyrian claim. Marcus felt his jaw clench, but Lirelei remained perfectly composed. When called upon to respond, she rose gracefully and turned toward the center of the chamber. Trade Prime Zixcar raises an interesting point about the limitations of organic memory, she began, her melodious voice carrying clearly. Perhaps it would be helpful to demonstrate those limitations, or lack thereof. She paused, allowing silence to fill the vast space. I invite any delegate in this chamber to test my knowledge. Ask me about any aspect of Federation law, any historical precedent, any territorial dispute from the past 1,000 years. I will answer without consultation, without technological aid, and without assistance from my human colleague. The chamber erupted in whispers. This was unprecedented. No one had ever made such an open challenge in Federation Council. Administrator Walsh called for order. Princess Lirelei, this is highly irregular. The Federation Council is not typically a venue for academic demonstrations. With respect, Administrator, this is not academic. My people's legitimate claims are being dismissed not on their merits, but because of prejudice against my physical condition. If demonstrating my competence is what's required to ensure fair consideration, then I'm prepared to do so. Unit 7743 of the Synthetic Coalition spoke up. Its mechanical voice translated as, this unit finds the proposed demonstration logically sound. If organic memory capacity is in question, direct testing provides optimal verification. The aquatic delegation finally contributed, their representative speaking through a water-filled communication device. The Deep Current Collective agrees. Let knowledge be tested by knowledge. Administrator Walsh looked around the chamber, gauging the mood. Very well. We will proceed with an informal knowledge assessment. Each delegation may pose one question related to mining rights, territorial law, or historical precedent. What followed was unlike anything in Federation Council history. For 3 hours, Lyra stood at the center of the chamber, while representatives from dozens of species attempted to stump her with increasingly obscure legal questions. The Thorian delegate began. Article 847 of the Mineral Rights Codex, subsection 12. Paragraph 4. What does it say about disputed claims involving pre-sentient life forms? Article 847.12.4 states that mining operations may not proceed if they would disrupt the natural development of species showing early signs of sentience. Lyra replied immediately. The determination of pre-sentience must be made by at least 3 qualified xenobiologists from different species, and the finding must be unanimous. The Crystarian representative tried next. The Burning Sands incident 421 years ago. What was the final arbitration ruling? The Federation Council ruled that the hegemony of Saltar had exceeded their territorial claims by 0.7 parsecs, invalidating their mining operations on 3 worlds. The affected resources were redistributed to the civilian mining collective as compensation for environmental damage. The ruling established the precedent that territorial disputes must be resolved before resource extraction begins. Question after question came, each more specific than the last. Lyra answered them all with precision and detail that amazed even Marcus, who had witnessed her preparation. She quoted statutes verbatim, referenced obscure historical cases, and explained complex legal principles with clarity that made them accessible to delegates from radically different cultures. The Calarian delegation made increasingly desperate attempts to find gaps in her knowledge. Trade Prime Zixcar asked about a minor treaty amendment from 734 years ago that had been superseded by later legislation. Lyra not only knew about the amendment, but explained why it had been replaced and how the new provisions improved upon the original language. Finally, after the last delegation had posed their question, Administrator Walsh called for silence. Princess Lyra, your demonstration has been remarkable. However, the question remains whether this knowledge can be applied practically to the current dispute. Then let's apply it, Lyra said. Trade Prime Zixcar, you claim that historical precedence is insufficient to establish mining rights. I assume you're referencing the Galactic Commerce Code, Article 891, which requires continuous occupation or active exploitation to maintain territorial claims. The Calarian's compound eyes flickered with surprise. That is correct. However, Article 891 contains an exception in subsection 7 for species that have filed formal notification of temporary withdrawal due to technological advancement. The Zephyrian Empire filed such notification 847 years ago, when we developed quantum extraction methods that required a moratorium on conventional mining. She paused, letting this sink in. The notification was properly filed with the Galactic Commerce Authority and included detailed timelines for resumption of operations. Under Article 891.7, our claims remained valid during the moratorium period. Marcus watched as understanding dawned on the faces around the chamber. Lyra had just revealed that the legal foundation of the competing claims was flawed. Furthermore, she continued, the Calarian Trade Consortium's own claims are based on Article 445 of the Resource Development Statutes, which requires proof of indigenous discovery. However, your own historical records filed with the Merchant Guild 234 years ago indicate that your survey teams discovered the Kepler 442 system's mineral wealth through analysis of Zephyrian mining reports. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Trade Prime Zixcar's chittering had stopped entirely. Under Federation law, Lyra concluded, derivative discovery based on another party's prior work cannot establish superior claims. The Calarian Consortium may file for secondary extraction rights after Zephyrian operations are established, but they cannot claim territorial precedence. Administrator Walsh looked around the chamber, noting the stunned expressions on most delegates' faces. Are there any challenges to Princess Lyra's legal analysis? The Thorian representative, known for their logical precision, spoke carefully. This delegate finds no flaws in the presented reasoning. The legal precedents appear correctly cited and appropriately applied. Unit 7743 added, Calarian claims exhibit fundamental logical inconsistencies. Zephyrian position demonstrates superior legal foundation. Even some of the delegations that had initially supported the challenge remained silent. The evidence was overwhelming. Trade Prime Zixcar made one final attempt. This display proves nothing about her ability to negotiate fair agreements. Legal knowledge and diplomatic skill are not the same thing. Lyralee turned toward his voice with a slight smile. You're absolutely right, Trade Prime. Legal knowledge is only useful if one can apply it diplomatically. Shall we discuss the terms under which the Kellarian Consortium might participate in Kepler 4M42 development as junior partners? The question hung in the air like a blade. Marcus realized that Lyralee had just offered them exactly what she'd demonstrated they were legally entitled to, secondary rights, while making it clear that she held all the advantages in any negotiation. The chamber remained silent as the implications became clear. The blind princess hadn't just defended her claims, she had transformed the entire negotiation landscape. The negotiations that followed Lyralee's legal demonstration were unlike anything Marcus had witnessed in his diplomatic career. What should have been a contentious battle over mining rights had transformed into something resembling a masterclass in interspecies diplomacy. Lyralee had successfully established the Zephyrian Empire's primary claim to the Kepler 442 system, but rather than pressing her advantage ruthlessly, she began crafting a solution that would satisfy multiple parties. Marcus watched in fascination as she turned legal victory into diplomatic opportunity. The Kepler 442 system contains 14 planets and 47 major asteroids, she explained to the assembled delegates. Our quantum extraction methods are most effective on 3 specific worlds with rare mineral compositions. This leaves significant resources available for conventional mining partnerships. The Kellarian delegation, still reeling from their legal defeat, remained suspicious. Trade Prime Zixcar chittered nervously before speaking. What assurances do we have that Zephyrian operations won't interfere with secondary extraction? An excellent question, Lyralee replied. I propose the establishment of a joint monitoring committee with representatives from all interested parties. The committee would oversee extraction schedules, environmental protection protocols, and resource allocation. Marcus noticed how she had shifted the conversation from confrontation to collaboration. Instead of hoarding the victory, she was creating opportunities for everyone to benefit. The Thorian representative leaned forward, their logical mind engaged by the proposal. This committee would require neutral arbitration in case of disputes. Which authority would you suggest? The Federation Mining Council has extensive experience with multi-species operations, Lyralee said. However, I would also recommend including representatives from the Environmental Monitoring Collective and the Civilian Mining Guild to ensure balanced oversight. The aquatic delegation bubbled approvingly. Their representative spoke through the translation system. The Deep Current Collective finds wisdom in shared stewardship. What environmental protections would be included? Marcus realized that Lyralee was doing something remarkable. She was turning a territorial dispute into a conservation initiative. As she outlined environmental safeguards, profit-sharing arrangements, and technological exchange programs, he began to understand why her own people had sent her despite their prejudices. She wasn't just defending Zephyrian interests, she was advancing them through inclusive leadership. The quantum extraction process produces a byproduct that's extremely valuable for fusion reactor maintenance, she explained. Rather than stockpiling this material, we could establish a cooperative distribution network. All participating species would have access at cost, strengthening galactic energy infrastructure. Unit 7743 of the Synthetic Coalition processed this information with mechanical precision. This arrangement would reduce fusion maintenance costs by approximately 34% across participating civilizations. The economic benefit exceeds the value of disputed mining rights. The chamber buzzed with translated conversations as delegates realized the scope of what Lyralee was proposing. This wasn't just about mineral extraction anymore. It was about creating a new model for interspecies cooperation. During a recess, Marcus found himself walking with Lyralee through the station's central promenade. The artificial gravity and atmosphere controls created a pleasant environment that accommodated multiple species, and for the first time since arriving, they weren't the center of hostile attention. You're not just negotiating mining rights, Marcus observed. You're building something bigger. My people sent me here expecting me to fail, Lorelei replied. They thought my blindness would make me weak, that other species would take advantage of me. But they underestimated what I learned from being underestimated my entire life, which is that when people dismiss you, they stop guarding themselves. They reveal their true motivations, their weaknesses, their fears. The Calarians aren't really angry about mining rights. They're desperate because their economy is failing. The Thorians aren't being logical. They're terrified of being left behind technologically. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this insight. So you're addressing their real concerns instead of their stated positions. Exactly. The Calarians need economic stability, so I'm offering them partnership opportunities. The Thorians want technological advancement, so I'm proposing research exchanges. The Aquatic Collective cares about environmental protection, so I'm making that central to the entire operation. They paused at an observation window overlooking the planet below. Marcus described the view. Swirling clouds, blue oceans, the curve of the horizon against the star field. Lyra Lee listened attentively, building a mental picture from his words. What do you see when you look at the galaxy? She asked suddenly. I see possibility, I suppose. Infinite worlds, infinite diversity, sometimes conflict, but also incredible potential for cooperation. I hear the galaxy, she said. Every species has a unique sound signature, their language patterns, their technology, their cultural rhythms. Most people focus on the differences, but I hear the harmonies, the places where different sounds complement each other. Marcus was struck by the metaphor. Is that what you're doing in there? Creating harmony? I'm trying to. My people believe the gods took my sight as punishment, but maybe they gave me different vision instead. Maybe I can see opportunities that others miss because I'm not distracted by surface appearances. When negotiations resumed, Lyra Lee's approach became even more sophisticated. She had clearly spent the recess analyzing each delegation's underlying concerns, and now she addressed them systematically. The silicon-based Crystarian collective has remained silent during these discussions, she noted, turning toward their heated platform. I suspect this is because conventional mining operations would be extremely disruptive to your crystalline reproduction cycles in nearby systems. The Crystarian representative's harmonic tones rang with surprise. This observation is accurate. We had not expected this concern to be acknowledged. Our quantum extraction methods produce minimal vibrations and no electromagnetic interference. Lyra Lee continued. We could easily adjust our operational schedules to avoid interference with your reproductive periods. In exchange, perhaps you could share your expertise in crystalline matrix stabilization. It would significantly improve our extraction efficiency. Marcus watched the Crystarian delegation huddle in rapid harmonic consultation. Within minutes, they had agreed to the proposal. The synthetic coalition had remained largely analytical throughout the proceedings, but Lyra Lee addressed them directly. Unit 7743, your people value logical efficiency above all else. This cooperative framework would create optimal resource utilization with minimal waste. More importantly, it would establish precedents for future multi-species development projects. This unit concurs, Unit 7743 replied. Logical efficiency indicates superior outcomes through cooperative structures rather than competitive conflicts. One by one, Lyra Lee addressed the specific concerns and interests of each delegation. She offered the hegemony of Saltar access to rare Earth elements they needed for their atmospheric processors. She proposed that the Nomadic Fleet Collective could establish refueling stations in the outer system. She even found ways to include smaller delegations that had been completely ignored in previous negotiations. As the day wore on, Marcus realized he was witnessing something historic. Lyra Lee wasn't just resolving a mining dispute, she was creating a new framework for galactic cooperation. The Kepler 442 development project was becoming a template for how different species could work together instead of competing against each other. But perhaps most remarkably, she was doing it all while completely blind, relying on her extraordinary memory, her keen understanding of alien psychology, and her ability to hear harmonies where others only heard noise. By the end of the session, even Trade Prime Zixcar was enthusiastically discussing profit-sharing ratios and environmental protection protocols. The transformation was complete. The aliens who had begun the day by shunning and mocking the blind princess were now competing for the privilege of working with her. 3 weeks after the successful negotiations, Marcus found himself aboard a Zephyrian diplomatic vessel, bound for the Empire's capital world. Lyrelli had invited him to witness the presentation of the mining agreement to her people, though her expression suggested she was dreading the encounter. The ship itself was a marvel of engineering, sleek lines that seemed to flow like liquid metal, powered by the same quantum technology that made Zephyrian mining so efficient. What struck Marcus most, however, was how poorly adapted it was for someone with visual impairments. The corridors were filled with holographic displays, color-coded navigation systems, and visual status indicators that Lyrelli couldn't use. My people never expected I'd be successful enough to need accessible transportation, she explained when Marcus commented on the design. This ship was built for my sighted cousin who was supposed to handle all important diplomatic missions. What changed? I requested this assignment specifically. My father, Emperor Keltheros, was forced to approve it when I demonstrated my knowledge of Federation law. He probably hoped I'd fail spectacularly and finally prove that the gods were right to mark me as defective. As they traveled through hyperspace, Lyrelli told Marcus more about Zephyrian society. It was ancient and hierarchical, with complex social castes determined by perceived divine favor. Physical perfection was seen as evidence of the gods' blessing, while any disability or difference was interpreted as divine punishment for sins, either personal or ancestral. The irony, she said, as they stood in the ship's observation lounge, is that our greatest scientific and cultural achievements came from individuals who didn't fit the standard template. Our most brilliant engineers were often those with neurodivergent thinking patterns. Our greatest artists had unique sensory perspectives, but instead of celebrating this diversity, we marginalized it. Marcus described the hyperspace distortions visible through the transparent aluminum windows, swirling patterns of light and energy that defied normal physics. On Earth we have a saying, diversity is strength. It sounds like your people forgot that lesson. Not forgot, Lyrelli corrected. Never learned. The Zephyrian Empire conquered through technological superiority, not cooperation. We developed incredible advances by exploiting the unique capabilities of our outcasts, then refused to acknowledge their contributions. The conversation was interrupted by the ship's captain, a tall Zephyrian with the typical pale blue skin but eyes like golden stars. He approached respectfully but with obvious discomfort. Your Highness, he said formally, will be arriving at Zephyr Prime in 6 hours. I've received communications from the Imperial Palace. Your father, the Emperor, has arranged for a full court presentation of your negotiations. Marcus caught the hesitation in the captain's voice. That's good news, isn't it? Lyrelli's expression was grim. Not necessarily. Full court presentations are usually reserved for either great triumphs or spectacular failures. Given my father's expectations, surely the success of the negotiations speaks for itself, the captain said. The economic benefits alone will strengthen the Empire significantly. Captain Vexinar, Lyrelli said gently, how long have you served in the Imperial fleet? 15 years, Your Highness. Then you know that in Zephyrian politics facts matter less than perception. If the court believes the gods disapprove of me, no amount of success will change that. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. They're going to spin this against you somehow. Most likely. They'll probably claim that I succeeded through deception, or that the Federation took advantage of my disability to secure unfavorable terms, or that human influence corrupted the negotiations. As if summoned by their conversation, the ship's communication system chimed with an incoming transmission from Zephyr Prime. The holographic display showed a figure in elaborate court robes, another member of the royal family, judging by the ceremonial crown and the family's distinctive silver hair. Princess Lyrelli, the figure said with barely concealed smugness. I am Prince Ketharos, your dear cousin. The Emperor has asked me to brief you on court sentiment regarding your recent activities. Marcus noticed how the prince's eyes never quite focused on Lyrelli, as if looking directly at her was somehow distasteful. The court is naturally concerned about reports from Nexus Station, Ketharos continued. There are disturbing rumors that you relied heavily on foreign assistance during the negotiations. Some suggest that this human, his gaze flicked dismissively toward Marcus, may have been providing covert technological aid. The negotiations were conducted under full Federation oversight. Lyrelli replied calmly. Every session was recorded. There was no technological assistance. Perhaps not technological, the prince said with a cold smile. But surely you understand the concern about human psychological manipulation. These aliens are known for their emotional manipulation tactics. It would be unfortunate if the Empire's interests were compromised by such influences. Marcus felt his anger rising, but Lyreley placed a gentle hand on his arm, warning him to stay silent. "I see," she said carefully. "And what does the Emperor think of these concerns?" "His Imperial Majesty is naturally eager to review the full details of your agreement. He has arranged for a thorough examination by the Court of Divine Assessment. They will determine whether your actions were guided by divine will or other influences." The transmission ended, leaving an uncomfortable silence in the observation lounge. Captain Vexinar looked troubled while Marcus struggled to contain his outrage. "A Court of Divine Assessment?" Marcus asked. "What exactly is that?" "A tribunal of high priests and court officials who interpret divine will," Lyreley explained. "They examine significant events to determine whether they represent divine favor or divine displeasure. If they rule against me, what happens? Best case scenario? I'm stripped of my titles and exiled. Worst case?" She shrugged. "Religious tribunals have been known to order more permanent solutions to problems they perceive as divine displeasure." Marcus stared at her in shock. "They would execute you for succeeding in your mission?" "They would execute me for succeeding in a way that challenges their fundamental beliefs about divine will and natural order. My success suggests that either the gods were wrong to mark me as defective, or that the gods actually favored diversity over conformity. Neither possibility is acceptable to the current power structure." Captain Vexinar spoke up quietly. "Your Highness, there are those in the fleet who believe your success reflects well on the Empire. Not everyone agrees with the court's traditional interpretations." "Thank you, Captain. But fleet support won't matter much if the Court of Divine Assessment rules against me." As Zephyr Prime grew larger in the viewports, Marcus found himself studying Lyreley's profile. She had spent her entire life fighting prejudice and discrimination, had achieved a diplomatic triumph that would benefit her people for generations, and now faced the very real possibility of being punished for her success. "What do you need from me?" he asked quietly. "I need you to be yourself," she replied. "Human, stubborn, unwilling to accept that things have to be the way they've always been. My people need to see that there are other ways of thinking, other possibilities. And if the court rules against you, then at least I'll have shown them what's possible. Sometimes that's enough to plant seeds for future change." Marcus looked out at the approaching planet, a beautiful world of floating cities and crystal spires that reflected the light of twin suns. It was gorgeous and alien and completely unforgiving to anyone who didn't fit its rigid definitions of perfection. But as he watched Lyreley prepare for what might be her final diplomatic challenge, he realized that she had already won something more important than any court ruling. She had proven that strength could come from unexpected places, that wisdom didn't require sight, and that the galaxy's most shunned individual might also be its most capable diplomat. Now she just had to convince her own people of what the rest of the galaxy was beginning to understand. The Imperial Palace of Zephyr Prime was a monument to perfection that made Marcus feel like an intruder in paradise. Crystalline spires reached toward the twin suns, their surfaces shifting through the spectrum as light refracted through living architecture. Gardens floated unsupported in the air, their exotic plants cascading in impossible waterfalls that defied gravity through quantum manipulation. Everything was designed for visual impact, Marcus realized as he walked beside Lyreley through corridors lined with holographic art displays. The beauty was overwhelming, almost aggressive in its perfection, for someone who couldn't see any of it. The palace must feel like an elaborate mockery. "Describe it to me," Lyreley said quietly as they approached the throne room. Marcus struggled to find words that could capture the alien grandeur around them. "It's like someone took every beautiful thing in the universe and arranged them into a symphony of light and form. But it feels like cold, like it was designed to intimidate rather than welcome." "That's exactly right," she replied. "The palace is meant to demonstrate divine favor through material perfection. The message is that the gods bless those who deserve blessing, and everyone else should know their place." The throne room doors opened with a sound like crystal chimes, revealing a vast space that took Marcus's breath away. The chamber was easily the size of a football stadium, with a domed ceiling that showed real-time views of the planet's surface. Hundreds of courtiers lined the walls, their pale blue skin and silver hair creating a sea of elegant, identical faces. At the far end of the chamber, Emperor Keltheros sat on a throne that seemed to be carved from a single massive crystal. He was tall and imposing even seated, with the same elegant features as his daughter but eyes like chips of blue ice. Beside him stood Prince Keltheros and several figures in elaborate religious robes. The court of divine assessment, Marcus assumed. Princess Lyralee of House Zephyr, a herald announced, his voice echoing through the vast space, returning from diplomatic mission to the Federation Council. The walk to the throne felt endless. Marcus could feel hundreds of eyes watching them, could hear whispers in the musical Zephyrian language that his translator rendered as fragments. Are you still blind? Human contamination? Disgrace to the bloodline? Lyralee moved with perfect composure, her head held high as she navigated the chamber using subtle audio cues and her memorized knowledge of the palace layout. When they reached the appropriate distance from the throne, she performed a formal bow that was both respectful and dignified. "Father," she said simply, "I have returned with news of our negotiations." Emperor Keltheros studied his daughter with an expression that Marcus couldn't read. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "Indeed, we have received interesting reports about your activities at Nexus Station." One of the robed figures stepped forward, High Priest Morthek, according to the translator. "Your Imperial Majesty, the Court of Divine Assessment has concerns about the methods employed during these negotiations. There are questions about whether the results truly represent divine favor or other influences. What specific concerns?" Lyralee asked calmly. "Reports indicate that you relied heavily on foreign assistance," Morthek replied. "Furthermore, the terms of the agreement you negotiated appear suspiciously favorable to non-Zephyrian interests. This suggests either incompetence or deliberate betrayal of imperial interests." Marcus felt his temper flare, but before he could speak, Lyralee raised her hand slightly, a subtle signal for him to remain quiet. "High Priest, would you like me to present the full details of the agreement to the court?" "That will not be necessary," Prince Keltheros interjected smoothly. "We have already analyzed the documents. The question is not what you achieved, but how you achieved it." "I achieved it through knowledge, preparation, and diplomatic skill," Lyralee replied. "The same methods used by every successful negotiator in Zephyrian history." "Impossible," Morthek declared. "No individual with your limitations could possess the comprehensive knowledge required for such complex negotiations. You must have received assistance from hidden technological devices or foreign manipulation." The murmur of agreement from the courtiers was like a wave washing through the chamber. Marcus realized that the trial had been predetermined. They weren't interested in the truth, only in confirming their existing prejudices. But then Lyralee did something unexpected. She smiled. "High Priest Morthek, you raise an excellent point about the limitations of memory and knowledge retention. Perhaps it would be helpful to demonstrate the extent of those limitations." She turned toward the assembled court, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the vast chamber. "I invite anyone present to test my knowledge of Zephyrian law, history, or culture. Ask me about any legal precedent, any historical event, any cultural tradition from our civilization's records." The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Marcus remembered her similar demonstration at Nexus Station, but this was different, more personal, more dangerous. She was challenging not just their assumptions about her capabilities, but their fundamental beliefs about divine will and natural order. "This is unnecessary theater," Prince Keltheros said dismissively. "The question is not your knowledge, but the source of that knowledge." "Then let's examine the source," Lyralee replied. "I learned our laws from Master Jurist Veltaran, who trained me personally for 12 years. I learned our history from Imperial historian Zephanis, who provided me with access to the primary archives. I learned diplomatic protocol from Ambassador Kithra, who supervised my education in interspecies relations." She paused, letting this information settle. "All three of my teachers are present in this chamber today. Perhaps they would like to comment on the thoroughness of my education." Marcus saw movement in the crowd as three elderly Zephyrians stepped forward. Their expressions were complex, pride mixed with obvious discomfort at being put in such a position. Master Jurist Veltaran spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of decades of legal expertise. Princess Lyrelai was the most dedicated student I have ever taught. Her retention of legal precedents and her understanding of jurisprudential principles exceed that of most practicing attorneys. Imperial historian Zephanis nodded agreement. Her knowledge of our civilization's history is comprehensive and precise. She has memorized not just the major events but the subtle connections and patterns that most scholars miss. Ambassador Kithara was more cautious but equally clear. Her understanding of diplomatic protocol and interspecies relations is exceptional. She prepared for the Federation negotiations with extraordinary thoroughness. The testimony created an uncomfortable stir in the court. These were respected figures whose word carried significant weight. Dismissing their assessment would be difficult without appearing to question their own competence. High Priest Morthek made one final attempt to maintain the predetermined narrative. Even accepting her education, the results achieved suggest supernatural assistance. The gods do not favor those marked with divine displeasure. Then perhaps, Lyrelai said quietly, we should examine what the gods actually accomplished through these negotiations. She gestured toward Marcus, who stepped forward with a data crystal containing the full economic projections from the Kepler 442 agreement. The mining arrangement will increase Imperial revenue by 340% over the next decade, she announced. The technological exchanges will advance our quantum extraction methods by an estimated 50 years. The cooperative framework will establish the Zephyrian Empire as the leading voice in interspecies resource development. The numbers were staggering, and Marcus could see them having an impact on the assembled courtiers. These were practical people who understood that economic strength translated to political power. Furthermore, Lyrelai continued, the agreement includes provisions for establishing Zephyrian research stations throughout Federation space, expanding our scientific capabilities and diplomatic influence across the galaxy. Emperor Kael'theros leaned forward slightly, his icy eyes showing the first hint of genuine interest. Explain these research provisions. For the next hour, Lyrelai systematically presented every aspect of the agreement she had negotiated. She demonstrated how each concession to other species actually advanced Zephyrian interests, how the cooperative framework positioned the Empire as a galactic leader rather than an isolated power, and how the economic benefits would fund technological advancement for generations. As she spoke, Marcus watched the mood in the chamber shift. The whispers changed from dismissive to impressed. Even Prince Ketharos looked troubled by the undeniable success of his cousin's mission. But the real change came when Lyrelai addressed the fundamental question that everyone had been avoiding. My lords and ladies, she said, turning to face the full assembly, you believe the gods marked me as defective to punish some sin. But what if you're wrong? What if they gave me different gifts for a different purpose? The silence that followed was profound. The silence in the throne room stretched until it became almost unbearable. Marcus could feel the weight of hundreds of years of tradition and prejudice hanging in the air, waiting to see if one blind princess could shatter beliefs that had defined an entire civilization. Blasphemy, High Priest Morthek whispered, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. The gods do not grant gifts through divine displeasure, don't they? Lyrelai asked, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. Master Historian Zephanis, what does the Chronicle of First Awakening tell us about the origins of Zephyrian civilization? The elderly historian looked uncomfortable but answered truthfully. The Chronicle states that our people were once scattered and weak, considered inferior by the dominant species of our time. It was only when we learned to see differently, to perceive quantum fluctuations invisible to other species, that we developed the technology that made us great. And how did we learn to see differently? The Chronicle mentions a group of altered individuals who possessed unique sensory capabilities. They were initially shunned by society, but eventually became the foundation of our scientific revolution. Marcus watched as understanding rippled through the assembled courtiers. Their own sacred texts contained the very precedent that Lyrelai was invoking. The gods have always used unexpected vessels, she continued. Our greatest technological advances came from those who thought differently, saw differently, experienced the world differently. But somewhere along the way we forgot that lesson. We began to worship the results while rejecting the very diversity that made those results possible. Emperor Kaltheros stood slowly, his imposing figure casting shadows across the crystal throne. When he spoke, his voice was measured but carried an undertone of something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Perhaps pride, perhaps fear. You suggest that your condition is not a curse, but a gift? I suggest that my condition taught me to develop capabilities that others overlook, Lyrelei replied carefully. While others relied on visual appearance to judge alien species, I learned to listen to their true intentions. While others were distracted by surface conflicts, I heard the underlying harmonies that could create cooperation. She paused, gathering herself for what Marcus sensed would be her final argument. Father, the galaxy is changing. The old ways of conquest and domination are giving way to cooperation and mutual benefit. The species that thrive in this new reality will be those that can build bridges, not walls. Those that can find strength in diversity, not weakness. Prince Kaltheros stepped forward, his handsome features twisted with something approaching desperation. You speak of change as if it's inevitable, but the Zephyrian Empire has endured for millennia through strength and purity. Why should we abandon proven methods for alien philosophies? Because those alien philosophies just secured us the most profitable mining agreement in our history, Marcus said, speaking for the first time since entering the throne room. Every eye in the chamber turned toward him, and he felt the weight of their attention like a physical force. But he had watched Lyrelei fight alone for too long. Your Imperial Majesty, he continued, addressing the Emperor directly. I've spent 15 years in diplomatic service, negotiating with dozens of species across the galaxy. I've never seen anyone accomplish what your daughter accomplished at Nexus Station. The, testimony of a primitive alien carries little weight in this court, High Priest Morthek said dismissively. Then, perhaps the testimony of the Federation Council will carry more weight, Marcus replied, producing a sealed communication crystal. I received this just before we entered the palace. He activated the crystal, and a holographic figure materialized in the center of the chamber, Administrator Walsh from Nexus Station. Your Imperial Majesty, the hologram said formally, the Federation Council has asked me to convey their unprecedented satisfaction with the recent negotiations conducted by Princess Lyrelei. Her diplomatic skills and innovative approach to interspecies cooperation have impressed representatives from across the galaxy. The hologram paused before continuing with even greater emphasis. The Council has voted unanimously to offer Princess Lyrelei the position of Chief Interspecies Mediator, a role that would make her the highest-ranking diplomatic officer in Federation space. The impact of this announcement was immediate and dramatic. Chief Interspecies Mediator was a position that had never existed before. The Federation had created it specifically for Lyrelei. The political implications were staggering. Furthermore, Administrator Walsh continued, the Council wishes to invite the Zephyrian Empire to establish permanent diplomatic missions throughout Federation space, with Princess Lyrelei serving as the primary ambassador. This arrangement would significantly expand Zephyrian influence and create unprecedented opportunities for technological and cultural exchange. The hologram faded, leaving the throne room in stunned silence. Marcus could see the wheels turning in dozens of minds as the courtiers processed what they had just heard. The Federation wasn't just acknowledging Lyrelei's success. They were offering to make her the most powerful diplomat in known space. Emperor Kaltheros stared at the space where the hologram had been, his icy composure finally showing cracks. You did not mention this offer. I wanted the court to evaluate my actions based on their merits, not their rewards, Lyrelei replied. The question before us is not whether I succeeded, but whether the Empire will embrace the opportunities that success has created. And if we refuse? Prince Kaltheros asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. Then the Federation will offer these opportunities to other species, Marcus said bluntly. The Council is committed to this new model of cooperation. The only question is whether the Zephyrian Empire will lead it or watch from the sidelines. High Priest Morthek made one final attempt to maintain the old order. Your Imperial Majesty, accepting this offer would require acknowledging that divine displeasure can somehow become divine favor. It challenges the fundamental principles of our faith. Or, Master Jurist Veltaran said quietly, stepping forward from the crowd, it suggests that our understanding of divine will has been incomplete. The old jurist's words carried surprising weight. As one of the most respected legal scholars in the Empire, His theological opinions couldn't be dismissed easily. Consider, he continued, that the gods might work through apparent contradiction to achieve greater purposes. Princess Lyralei's condition led her to develop extraordinary capabilities that now benefit the entire empire. Perhaps what we interpreted as punishment was actually preparation. Imperial historian Zephanis nodded agreement. Our own chronicles speak of the gods using unexpected means to achieve their ends. The Chronicle of the Quantum Wars describes how apparent defeats became the foundation for ultimate victory. Marcus watched Emperor Kael'Tharos as these arguments unfolded. The ruler's expression remained neutral, but Marcus could sense the internal struggle. This was a man facing the collapse of beliefs that had defined his entire worldview. Finally, the emperor spoke. Princess Lyralei approached the throne. She walked forward with the same grace she had shown throughout the ordeal, stopping at the traditional distance from the crystal seat of power. "Kneel," he commanded. For a moment, Marcus feared the worst, but as Lyralei knelt, her father descended from the throne and approached her, something that broke centuries of protocol. "You have achieved something remarkable," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "You have not only secured advantages for our empire, but challenged us to see possibilities we had never imagined." He placed his hands on her shoulders in a gesture that was both paternal and formal. "Rise, Chief Ambassador Lyralei, first of her name, Speaker for the Empire Beyond the Stars." The title was newly created, Marcus realized, designed to acknowledge both her traditional rank and her new role. As she stood, the assembled court burst into formal applause, not enthusiastic perhaps, but respectful. "The Empire accepts the Federation's offer," Emperor Kael'Tharos announced. "We will establish diplomatic missions throughout Federation space, with Chief Ambassador Lyralei as our primary representative." High Priest Morthek stepped forward, his expression showing resigned acceptance. "If this is divine will, then we must acknowledge it, however unexpected its manifestation." In the weeks that followed, as Marcus prepared to return to Earth and Lyralei prepared for her new role as the galaxy's most influential diplomat, he reflected on what he had witnessed. A civilization had been forced to confront its deepest prejudices and had chosen growth over tradition. The blind princess who had been shunned by the galaxy had become its most important bridge builder. The human who had simply refused to tolerate bullying had helped reshape interspecies relations, and together, they had proven that sometimes the most important changes come from the most unexpected sources. As their ships prepared to depart for different corners of the galaxy, Lyralei took Marcus's hand one final time. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing what others couldn't." "Thank you," he replied, "for showing me what humanity at its best can accomplish." The galaxy would never be quite the same. Sometimes, Marcus reflected, that was exactly what it needed.